Well, good morning, everyone. Happy New Year. Thanks, Adam. And by the way, the front row is empty here. If some of the choir at the back wants to move up to the front, you've got some nice seats right up here. So I'm just going to go through a mishmash of things just to give you an update. I guess the hope is that there maybe will be one thing of interest, at least out of what I go through. But first of all, we do have some new staff, and some people ask, well, how long are you new staff for? Because we have some newer staff that are on the agenda this afternoon, and I know they keep asking, well, how long are we going to be new staff? Well, basically, it's till we hire somebody else in front of you, so that might be a few years. So you're probably new staff for about 5 years, folks. But these folks they work in the livestock end. I'll just give you a quick overview. So James Byrne, and we brought him all the way from Ireland. He worked for the Ministry of Agriculture in Ireland. He is working as a beef cattle specialist and works out of Lindsay, Ontario. Megan Van Schaik, who is working out of Guelph, also a beef cattle specialist and has worked with Grober in the past, done some stuff around nutrition, so she's available. And then a third staff, Christine O'Reilly, who actually was here speaking at Sheep Day on Saturday, and she is our forage and grazier specialist, also out of Lindsay. So we're thrilled that the ministry has been hiring some bright young stars and that we've got lots of good folks to carry us forward. So nutrient management, which is a big part of my job, I always like to just give you an update as to where we're at. We're now 12 years in to having a Nutrient Management Act in Ontario. Figuring we have about 20,000 livestock farms in Ontario, at this point in time, basically almost 1/3 of livestock farms then have a nutrient management strategy or plan. So things are continuing to move along. It's still the case where probably about 25% of the manure generated in Ontario comes from a small group of the large livestock farms, large being more than 300 nutrient units. Now, 2017 was a banner year in terms of construction, expansion, and things going on in the livestock industry. If you go back to 2015, we had about 600 approvals. 2015, 600. 2016, we had about 600 approvals. This past year, we jumped up to well over 900 nutrient management approvals in Ontario. So tremendous amount of building going on, expansion, a lot of that in the supply management sector, as you're not surprised by, but it's kept our staff very busy. So that being said, if you are planning yourself, if you have livestock and you're going to be applying for nutrient management strategy, it's always a good idea to plan ahead and get the process going early. In terms of Ministry of the Environment, who does the inspection side, just of interest, they are really focusing on areas where there's been a source water protection crossover with your farm. So if a portion of your farm is under an area that's a source protection area, then you likely can expect in the near future to hear from the Ministry of the Environment. That's where they're focusing their inspections. Okay? The other thing on nutrient management is an initiative called Timing Matters. And you've heard lots about phosphorus, and so this doesn't surprise you, but this Timing Matters is really looking at the importance of when we apply manure and nutrients to land, checking the forecast, avoiding times where we know there's rain coming, avoiding other times where soil conditions aren't right. So this initiative has gone across Ontario, and there's a lot of research to support that. This is just one slide here, and it's basically showing that the majority of the phosphorus and nutrients that we lose from our land happens in the non-growing season. So November to April, that's the time when we're getting more of those storm events. That's the time when we're losing our phosphorus and nitrogen. So this does connect obviously to winter spreading, which I know I hammer on this probably every year, but it's still an ongoing challenge. There are no new regulations around winter spreading, but there is a pilot project that you may have heard about through the Ontario Farmer. And it's basically a peer-to-peer initiative where in the past I get those phone calls that somebody's complaining about winter spreading they see here or there, and we often have to pass that on to the Ministry of the Environment. What's happening this year instead is where that call comes in and it's not an immediate or an emergency situation. We instead pass it on to one of the sector organizations, so the beef farmers or the dairy farmers, and they have a program in place where they in turn follow up on it as opposed to a government person. So I think folks think that might be a good idea. We'll see how it works this year. It is a pilot project, but hopefully that will help. The other thing I get involved in, unfortunately, is barn fires. And we had a quiet summer. We didn't have too many barn fires. I've had 2 in my coverage area this week I've had to deal with. And why we get involved is because of the disposal of the dead stock. And these are never pleasant situations, but there is a requirement that the dead stock be managed in an appropriate way within 48 hours after a barn fire. So when those calls come in, it's always a challenging thing. Historically, people would have a barn fire, they would bury everything on site, including the dead stock, maybe not a big issue. But I think all of you know the barns we build now are a little different than they were a generation ago. They tend to be much larger, they're not wood and steel, but there's plastic and fiberglass and other things that are inert materials that will not break down in the soil. So as a result of that, burial is no longer really it's still a legal option in some cases, but not recommended. So that changes what we have to do. We have to look at what are the options for managing those dead stock. Barn fires per year, how many are we seeing? Well, I don't know if you can see that at the back, but if we go back to 2009, we were up just under 190 in a year. 2016, we're seeing that number has come down. That's a really encouraging thing, probably somewhere around the 145 mark in that year. Not all of these were barns that had livestock. In a typical year, there'll be between 30 and 40 farms that will have a fire that have livestock. But that number is going down a little bit, and we're glad to see that. What is going up, though, is the average cost of the damage done from those fires. No surprise on that regard. So this is still a very, very important issue. You think about the barn environment, it's very different than a house environment, or at least, well, there's a few houses I've been in that maybe aren't so different. But in most cases, the barn environment's very different. What have you got? You've got corrosive gases like hydrogen sulfide. You've got ammonia. Does a lot of damage to copper wires. You've got rodents in play. You've got dust, and you've got moisture. So basically, your Walmart extension cord does not cut it in a barn environment. So that's one of the things to look at is those electrical components, making sure that they're up to snuff. And so in this regard, a program that we continue to support is basically a thermal imaging or thermal camera program. We bought a dozen of these cameras. We gave them to Farm and Food Care to make available to any farmer who wants to borrow it for free for a week or however long it takes. You take that camera, you go through your barn, and you can do a scan of your electrical components and see if you've got some hot spots that could be a problem. This is in hopes of preventing future barn fires. So that program is still in play. All you need to do is contact Farm and Food Care and arrange a time to get that camera, and you can do it yourself. Okay, a little bit on some programs. Some of you I know in the room I've already talked to today are planning to head down to Waterloo for Nutrient Smart, which is on Friday the 19th of January, followed by the next day is Farm Smart at the University of Guelph. And like this event today, there's some great content, and would encourage you to consider heading down to those, either one of those 2 days. This next couple of slides I borrowed from Lois Sinclair. Lois is your regional rep for OSCIA, and Lois has just provided some updates on the Growing Forward 2 program. So that program is winding down, and just a reminder she asked me to mention is if you have a claim in play, you've got to get that finalized and into Guelph by the 15th of January, okay? Because we're at the end of that 5-year program. Just some quick numbers on that. Basically, there was about 3,500 projects that were claimed, $38 million paid in cost share, and of interest, the environment and climate change area was the largest dollar factor in that program. So lots happening there. Workshops, Environmental Farm Plan, the food safety ones, those are still continuing, and you can talk to Lois about when they're happening, where they're happening, but we're seeing lots of continued interest in those. So where's this going? Well, as of April 1st, Growing Forward 2 is done. The new program is the Canadian Agriculture Partnership, the CAP program, which some think is appropriately named. That program, we do not have all the details yet. There's not additional money, so we're not going to see a plethora of new programs, but we'll likely see some more of the same and maybe some more targeting or focused of that money into specific areas where there's some needed work to be done. So stay tuned on that one. You'll hear lots more in the coming months about what this is going to mean for funding programs for Ontario. One I would like to mention that goes along with this, a colleague of mine had done a lot of work on this. It's called GoCalc, and this is basically an online service where you can go, and if you've got indoor ag facilities, whether it be a greenhouse, a large livestock facility, and you want to look at how and in what ways can I reduce greenhouse gas emissions from this facility. That is basically a walk-through flow chart that gives you options, scenarios for how you can reduce greenhouse gases in that facility. So online, check that out. Just Google GoCalc, and it will bring that up. Okay, some resources, and we've got a number of these at our booth at the back here today, but we have an update to a number of our publications. The Agronomy Guide in particular, I'd like to mention that one that has been a popular one. We've got the new version of that out, so check that out. You can get those from Publication Ontario or through Laurie. Laurie, you probably get those, don't you? You get some of those through your office in Markdale, so great to go there and you can access those. The Weed Guide is one that everybody wants a hard copy of, but there's never enough around. You can get a PDF version of that, so you can talk to any of one of our staff about that, and we'll tell you how you can access that, or just go to the website. The Soil Health BMP, so these are new, and our BMP books in the past, you remember, were great, big, thick ones, kind of intimidating. It takes a lot of time in the bathroom to get through one of those books. So these new ones are much more focused, much thinner, and so there's a whole slew of them on soil health, cover crops, and all the related things around soil health. We've got them here. I see that Tori's got them here as well. So take a look at those. They're good stuff. And I want to touch a little bit on the Census of Agriculture, because you may know in 2016 there was a new federal census done. One of our staff, senior economist Stephen Duff, takes that federal information and drills down into the Ontario stuff and even some of the local and regional stuff. He puts a lot of great information on our website that you can access. So if you're ever looking for stats, regionally, locally, or provincially, that's available publicly, and it's just on our website. But I'll highlight a few things that might be of interest to you. So this, again, would be 2011 to 2016, so the last 5-year period for that census. Out of this one here, just the one point of interest I found is that the number of farms is decreasing a little bit, and the number of farmers is decreasing. Probably no surprise to anybody, but technically as of 2016, we're now under 50,000 farmers in Ontario. This one, I don't expect you to be able to read that. It's just showing the difference in commodity breakdown between 2011 and 2016. Of interest, but probably no surprise to anybody, is the fact that grains and oilseeds have grown. And what have they pushed out? Well, basically in the livestock sector, we've got fewer cattle in particular, fewer dairy and so on. So no surprise, but that shows up on the census. Greenhouses continue to grow. Look at the growth in the greenhouse industry over the last 25 years or so. Tremendous growth there. Organic farms, Feeder, this one's for you. So 1.3% of farms in Ontario now claim to be organic, but that's still growing. So up to 854 in 2016. So that's a sector that's small, but continuing to see some tremendous growth. Areas under no-till, that one actually has started to decline a little bit, plateau a little bit. So that's kind of interesting. Cover crops. Between 2011 and 2016, cover crops in Ontario have doubled. So tremendous, tremendous growth there, and that's exciting. But what's interesting when you look at the broader perspective is you go back to 1991, and we're back to about the same place we were. So that says a lot.
Can I just ask a question on that in particular? Is the same thing that you're measuring for cover crops, or is the definition different between the two?
The definition for cover crops has not changed, so we're looking at the same thing. I expect this is probably a lot more red clover and some of the other, more traditional cover crops. When you compare this to here, you think of the mixes we have now and the iterations of it now. And this is asking a question, so really the interpretation is in the responder to say whether they have cover crops or not. We didn't provide a clear definition. Tim, question 2.
I think the good news out of that is that as a percentage, you said the number of farmers is decreasing.
The good news there is what you said earlier, the number of farmers is decreasing, so the percentage of farms with cover crops has gone up significantly.
Excellent. Thanks. Were you an economics grad, Tim? Can't remember. Crop science, okay, fair enough. You must have paid more attention, though, in economics than I did. Well done. Farms reporting windbreaks or shelter belts, another one, no surprise, but being on the environmental side of interest to me in particular, and that is we know a lot of windbreaks and shelter belts were removed back around that 2011 period, and this is showing that there was a tremendous reduction. Glad to see it's coming back up again because we know the benefits of those in terms of soil health, but we see that reduction that happened there. In 2016 on the census, a new question was asked around renewable energy, and you've seen what's happened in the countryside there. So this is solar panels, almost 4,500 in Ontario. We've got wind turbines, just under 1,000, and others like biogas and biodiesel and so on. So that's a new thing on the census, kind of interesting to see that whole area growing around renewable energy. So farm operators' age, average age. If we look at that little detail there, 55.3. Anybody here that's 55 years old? Anybody 55? As of Friday? Lori is now the average farmer in Ontario. Congratulations, Lori. Amazing. And yeah, that's looking younger every day, Ralph. You know that? Yeah. So that number does continue to go up. I do have to say, though, it's exciting when you go out to events like this and you start to see a really nice blend in the demographic. We've had a good representation here of younger farmers, and we hope that continues. We appreciate you folks being here. This is on computer use, and you know, back when they started asking this question in the early years, a computer meant a computer. Now you realize when you talk about computer use, really what you're talking about is digital technology. And so it gets blended into GIS and smartphones and many other new technologies. And so this showing a bit of a drop here. I think what's really happening is people are using many, many different technologies aside from just the traditional computer. Whoever thought we would say the traditional computer? Isn't that something? Number of tractors and cropland per tractor. So fewer tractors working more acres. Anybody surprised by that? I doubt it. So lots of information that's available on our website for the census, and you're welcome to take a look there anytime. That continues to get updated and improved. So the last thing I want to talk about is an initiative of our ministry you may be aware of, but I think is really important, and this is the Soil Health and Conservation Strategy. And a number of years ago, we were challenged as a ministry by the Environment Commissioner to pull up our socks in the area of soil health and in the area of pedologists and soil science and get some things done because we were losing ground. And that has been taken to heart, and so there's been a lot of work done the last few years to the point where we now have a draft soil health and conservation strategy. This is not something, even though it's initiated by us as a ministry, we're not doing it ourselves. This is not we're going to throw something on the table and say, here it is, but we're collaborating with the majority of the ag organizations, a lot of industry partners to look at how do we move forward to improve things around soil health, okay? So there's a technical working group that I don't expect to be able to read that, but basically you've got everything from academia, government, conservation authorities, farm groups, all working together to look at how do we improve this whole area. So what I want to give you is just 4 slides to tell you the 4 key areas of this strategy so you know what's coming. The first area, likely of most interest and certainly pertains directly to farmers, is soil management. And that's where the rubber hits the road. That's day in, day out, the best management practices that you use on your farms to keep your soil there and to keep your soil healthy. So part of the study around this theme will be looking at those BMPs, further research, on-farm research, what are the barriers to adoption. So the folks in this room, I'm preaching to the choir today, but what about the folks down the road that are not doing these practices? And now maybe you're happy because they're giving you their topsoil, but we've got to look at the bigger picture here. So how do we bring in more people and get broader acceptance of the BMPs? So lots of work that we want to do there, as I said, including some research. The second theme area is around soil data and management. A key area of our soil data in the past has been this right here. This is the Grey County soil map, and if I look down in the corner, it says this was done in 1953. Now, is this wrong information or bad information? Absolutely not. That information still pertains. But as I showed that census slide on the use of computers and smartphones and everything, you want to be able to go onto your cell phone and say, what's the soil type here? What's the drainage here? Is this tile drained? You want all kinds of precision ag info. And frankly, we don't have that in a great format right now. So how can we take these soil maps? How can we make them more accessible? How can we do further testing and so on? And that has already started, I'll be honest with you. Is the ministry has hired some podologists. We have some folks that started work in the Ottawa area and Peterborough area, and they're literally digging holes and getting very, very detailed soil information. That in combination with LiDAR, remote sensing, and all these other technologies, the hope is to get some great soil information that is accessible to you as farmers. So that's what this whole second theme area is about. The third area is around evaluation and monitoring. So if our soils are getting better, how do we know? How do we prove that? If they're getting worse, what are the issues? So we need to be able to do more around a soil health test, both at the farm scale, regional scale, and provincial scale. There needs to be more work around what the targets should be. So if you've got a clay loam soil, what should your organic matter percentage be? Setting some realistic targets. Things around crop rotation, cover crops, and how about some research that is more than just 1 to 3 years out, but longer term? Some on-farm plots that are done repetitively to get that long-term information that we need. So that's what this whole third area is about. The final area is around soil knowledge and innovation. And if I think back to when Tim and I were at university, we could have chosen to take a soil science major. But today, that's not an option. There might be a soil science course, but there's not a major. We're not training podologists and scientists the way we need to be doing that. In our secondary schools and public schools, we're not giving a focus on the importance of soil, soil health, and agriculture production. So there's work that needs to be done there. So this whole area includes the bigger picture research, but it also blends down even outside of the ag community to society at large. So wouldn't it be great to have some peer-to-peer learning, some soil information hubs, and lots of demo facilities, both on-farm and on research facilities, that we could continue to do that research. That's what this final area is all about. So that gives you an overview of the strategy is intended to be put in place this spring. We received comments up until the end of last year and got a lot of great feedback. So we're scurrying to make those last-minute adjustments. Hopefully we can get that put in play this spring. And the intent is to move from 2018 to 2030 with this soil strategy. So I'm going to stop there. I appreciate the time. Lori, do we have time for questions?
Certainly. About 4 minutes.
Okay. So if there's any questions, please raise your hand and Lori can find you and bring you the microphone so the folks online can hear as well.
And we'll get you to stand up when you pose your question. Thank you.
We're one of the dairy farm operations that are expanding right now, Andrew, and we find ourselves this winter probably going to be overloaded with solid manure. Right now we have a solid a pad and runoff pit set up. Could you go over I think there's like a farm or field storage option or whatever that you can store manure in a field. Could you kind of just go over that and give a rundown of things to keep in mind if you're in that position?
Yeah, and I won't drill down too technical on it. We can do that afterwards. But the bottom line is that there's cases where weather or whatever is going to limit what you can do and when you can do it. So solid manure, fortunately, you've got more options, particularly when you run into something like this. So the key thing I would say in a situation like that is it's all location, location, and location. So avoiding a location, if you're going to be temporarily storing that pile somewhere, is avoiding tile inlets, tile drains, avoiding water courses, things that are of environmental concern. But if you need to pile that manure somewhere in the short term, that's not a problem. That's a record-keeping issue. So keep records of what you're doing, where it is. You're certainly within the requirements of the Nutrient Management Act to be doing that, but avoid an issue. And on the other hand, don't pile it at the highway on Highway 6 or somewhere. I like to say common sense, and keep some records on it. So that's the basics without drilling down. There is a whole checklist you can go through as to what are the setbacks from certain things like wells and so on to consider, but we can drill down to the details on that.
Thanks for your presentation, Andrew. Between nutrient management and CAP and the soil health strategy, is there going to be integration between those things? Or are they going to be three individual programs that is really going to cause more administration for the growers and farmers who are trying to make their way through them? Okay,
great question. So there's a couple of perspectives on that. When I speak from the bigger perspective, the government perspective, the administrative perspective, let's say, there is tremendous amount of linkage happening at a higher level, and a lot of it comes back to climate change, frankly, is that climate change, which used to be just kind of a tagline on the side, you said, is now an umbrella that a lot of things fit under, including programs, including soil health, including phosphorus in Lake Erie, because there's so many impacts from climate change. So from a delivery perspective, climate change is really an umbrella over top of all of that, including a lot of the funding dollars for those things. From the farmer perspective, though, you probably don't see it the same way. So I can't say for sure on the CAP program because we just don't know the details. They do promise us in the fine print that it's supposed to be simpler and more straightforward and more accessible for farmers to access that. I hope that's the case. We'll find out. There were a lot of challenges with growing forward too, as you will well recall. We went from a program that was first come, first served to one that was merit-based. And that transition time was difficult. We all know that. I think people started to get their head around it. At least we saw that as the program went on and the applications went up. My hope is that with the CAP program, it will be simpler. So the answer is probably a yes and no, that there will be some connections. It won't always be clear from the farmer's perspective, and that's where you're going to rely a lot on your local folks like Lois Sinclair and staff like myself to help. Question over here.
My question is, like you talk about the environment and you talk about climate change. Like, has anybody ever really said, this is the sign of climate change? Because we all know what we're hearing from the US, but maybe not the real people. But, and I'm not taking a slam at anybody, I don't mean it that way. There is a very complete explanation of one of the warning signs of climate change. And we're experiencing that very thing over the last 2 weeks. Is there any, like, is that part of the research or whatever you call the work you're doing for that?
So, big question, to be honest with you. Right now, in terms of climate change, we have a Climate Change Act in Ontario through the Minister of the Environment. We don't have details, don't know where that's going. So let me just comment on how I see it. And as a ministry, we actually, there's less of a focus on climate change, what's causing it and what's happening and so on. We're really dealing with what we're seeing happening on the ground day in and day out, which is changing weather. And how can we have, for example, soil health that can be vigorous enough to manage those huge storm events we get, like we got June 23rd in the Harriston area and over to Lake Huron. Many of you remember that storm. How do we have the structures in place, the management practice in place to manage those storm events and those things that we're seeing more frequently? The 100-year storm that's happening once every 20 years now. So climate change, there's big picture stuff going on. There's lots of stuff happening in boardrooms. Ministries are discussing programs and so on. But in terms of on the ground level, what's happening, it's how do we have farmers adapt and be resilient to manage those storm events that we're seeing more frequently. Frankly, that's what's really happening. So call it what you want, title it what you want, but day in and day out, you folks know what you're having to deal with out there. There's lots of, down at Ridgetown, we brought in James Garris Browning. Some of you may know him. His mother spoke here 3 years ago at Farmers Week. So they're climatologists, or they have a business where they predict weather. It's very interesting when you look at ocean currents, you look at La Nina and those bigger picture events, volcanoes in Russia, all of that is affecting what we're seeing right now, and they can make a case for that. But at the same time, the climate is warming. So it's complicated. There's more than one thing happening at a time. But frankly, our focus and my colleagues' focus is day in, day out, season in, season out, how do we deal with the extremes of weather that we're seeing? Okay, thank you very much, everyone.